time. So good morning, good afternoon. It's wonderful for all of you who've been able to join us today to have a discussion with my great friend Stephanie Foster, who is a global advocate for women and girls around the world. And recently, and Stephanie will explain why, she's written this great book, Take Action for Fighting for Women and Girls. And this is a real toolkit, as all Stephanie's books are, about where to go for the information, how to do it, who to call, where the links are. So you haven't got to do anything. It's all in this book, which is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other good bookshops. And the link to where to buy the book is in the chat. So that's there. So what I would like to do is to kick off with questions with Stephanie, then we'll take questions from the chat box, then we'll sum up and we'll finish about 5 minutes before time. So it gives everybody else time to go on to their next events and so on. If you've got any further questions for us after the discussion, just be in touch by email with both of us or the link, and we'll be back to you within a couple of hours. All right, is that okay? Fine. So Stephanie, I'd like to say to you that this is a great book that you've worked on for women and girls, and you have this great history. And what inspired you, Stephanie, to write the book? That's my first question to you.
Well, first of all, Mary, I want to thank you for hosting us at the blog breakfast 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever this is. So thank you. And thank you to everyone on the call, because as I look across who's on the call, literally every single one of you has been part of my life and my journey in really how to fight for gender equality and for women and girls' rights. And it's so great to see all of you, because I'm looking across, and for example, not to pick on people, but I will, I've known Gay Grunfeld since my time as a lawyer in San Francisco, and we were both president of the San Francisco Women Lawyers. And of course, Susan Markham is my business partner when I'm doing SMASH strategies, and just so many of the rest of you, several of you who worked with me on the Hill and in various other, iterations of my life at the State Department. And so I want to thank all of you for coming and being part of this conversation, because all of you are really a lot of the reason I wrote this. I focused a lot of my thinking over the last few years, particularly during the pandemic, on trying to think about how we could elevate the voices of women and girls. Obviously, I've done that for most of my career, but really looking to answer the question that so many people have had during COVID and really over the last, particularly probably 5 to 7 years, about how can we all take collective action to move forward on gender equality. And so from that, I really wanted to be able to put together in one place resources for people about things that have worked, ways that you can, in your own community and in your own workplace, focus on ways to advance gender equality and women's rights, whether, again, it's from the most simple thing, which is asking a question, to really structuring your own advocacy campaign. And part of why I wanted to do this was that I have seen, and I think we see every day, really, the incredible advocacy that's going on in the world, much of it led by women and girls, everything from Greta Thunberg and the climate strike to efforts at the boardroom and in shareholder meetings, which I know some of you have worked on who are on the call. So I think for me, it's a time where there is so much possibility for progress. At the same time, we also are, I think, seeing a lot of retrenchment. And so I wanted to be able to add to that discussion and hopefully help people think about how they could best structure what they want to do in terms of advocacy. Again, whether it's about the economy or politics or education or health, and think about what is already available that they can use to build upon in their own advocacy.
And I think, Stephanie, your experience, in particular, when you were in Afghanistan for that long period, and now going back, working, not in Afghanistan, but going back to work with the Afghanistan families, in particular women and girls in the camps around the world, which you're about to visit in the next few weeks. How do you feel with the retrenchment of all the countries that we visited together and many others over, and all of the people on this call have been to a number of countries where we're seeing retrenchment coming out of the pandemic? I think it's about 100 countries that were very much going forward and now going back. And I think we need to use your toolkit, and all of us working with business, working with governments, working with NGOs and people on the ground, how we continue to make the change and not to let it go back, and how we can make all the people out there advocates for education of women and girls at every level.
Well, sure. I mean, look, I think we live in, this is the most understated thing to say, right? Very challenging times. We have been able, many of us, to lead fairly normal lives during a 2.5-year pandemic. But I think we can't underestimate the impact of the pandemic globally. I read a statistic, I think it was yesterday in the Washington Post, where, in the United States, obviously, which is where I live, it looks like 1 million people have probably died of COVID. So you think about it, it's a tremendous human toll just in one country, and globally, obviously, much more, much bigger. And so we know that COVID, like everything, has had a differential impact on women and girls. And Susan and I did write a piece about this early in the pandemic, to say that in some ways, the statistics I'm going to talk about in a minute, I think, are very sobering, but this isn't an unusual situation where we're talking about the real-time impact on women and girls of the pandemic, which I think gives us the opportunity to really implement policy changes in a much more real-time way. So, for example, we know that while kids across the globe stayed out of school for health reasons, that at least 1.5 million girls are still out of school around the world, particularly based on access to education. And in some places, it's not as though they have a computer at home where they can do, Zoom calls. So we have to think about what is going on around the world. We know that job loss has disproportionately affected women. So globally, 39% of the labor force is comprised of women, but 54% at least of job loss has been has hit women. And if we think about it, that makes perfect sense. Women are often in the service sectors that were closed early in the pandemic, or have had all these additional care responsibilities and have made decisions to withdraw from the economy. At the same time, of course, the people who are in the healthcare sector and the retail sector are also disproportionately women. And so we just see these burdens of how do we balance all of that, and the need for real policy responses that address the issues around COVID, the COVID impact. Similarly, we've also seen really large increases in calls to domestic violence hotlines, because if you think about it, if you're stuck in the house with somebody who is an abuser all the time, of course, that those incidents might increase, or probably are likely to increase. So I think we see in real time the impact. And I think sort of the only silver lining, I guess, I see from those horrific statistics are two. One is that we're talking about them in real time, and we're saying these are the things that are happening, and policymakers need to confront them. We did see in the COVID task force at the very beginning of the pandemic, there were virtually no women on the US task force during the last administration. In this administration, there are, I think, 35% of the task force members, COVID task force members in the US are women. So I think that at least shows us the importance of bringing women's perspectives to something like COVID. And then lastly, my answer would be, on top of that, we have all these other things happening. Right now we're all gripped by what's happening on the border of Ukraine and Russia. We know about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. There are many, many other places around the world where there are issues every day that are happening that have a tremendous impact. And so I think this is a time where people are looking for new leadership. generally in the world, or new ways. I don't even mean new individuals. I mean a new way of thinking. And one of the things I would say is that one of the issues where I think there's a tremendous amount of thinking going on is, how do we define security? And maybe this is a good segue to talking about all the issues you've worked on, Mary, around women at the peace table, which is security isn't just, for many people around the world, sort of the absence of crime or the absence of war, but really feeling like they're secure in their daily lives, that they can live their lives on a, in a way on a daily basis that really is safe and secure, and allows them to participate in the economy and civil society in a way that's very where they feel safe and where they feel they can make a contribution, where they have food, food security. So I think this is a time where we're really looking, I think, globally for new thinking. At the same time, there's retrenchment.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think very much so that there is retrenchment. And I think all of us in our different ways have to ensure that we have at least 50% women at every table, and to try to persuade people that on every level, whether it's at peace talks, even though with the Taliban, they don't want women there, we have to ensure that the governments on those peace talks have women there, or women outside to bring them in, as happened in Northern Ireland and has happened in other countries. It's happening in Somalia, and those where women have eventually got in, or just about getting in, or in the Sudan. It's absolutely vital. In terms in business, we need to ensure that there's women in all discussions at every level, from bottom up. Otherwise, women are not represented, their views are not taken into consideration. And also it's vital, because if we don't have women, education isn't thought about, medical needs are not thought about, and most of all, investment's not talked about, because without investment, there isn't jobs for the future generations. So these are the issues that women will always bring to the table. Now I'm going to ask Lauren to tell us about the questions that have come in, so we can look at some of those just now. Lauren?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm going through them. Right now, we don't have any specific questions. So I'll let you all continue, and I'll interrupt if
I've
anybody
got a few other questions for which I think is quite important because of the terrible situation that we are in. A few days ago was the Day of the Girl. And as we know, every year there's been many activities around this in education, in STEM, and in people doing apprenticeships for a week in various offices, in various companies. Schools are open for other people to come in from industries that they've never met. Around the world, the Day of the Girl has always been a lot of pressure for us to do something. And this year, people were focused on what was happening in Ukraine. So wonder, Stephanie, how you think we could replace this next year. Maybe the Day of the Girl is a bit old-fashioned. Maybe we need to have a different title, because it was also very close to it. We had the Day of STEM, which I think got a bit more traction despite what was happening in Ukraine. But I think the Day of the Girl was just lost. It was just floated, but there was no activity where normally you're asked to do various activities or help out in one way or another, or you're writing a piece or you're doing something. So Stephanie, the Day of the Girl needs revamping, and to make it more in line with what's happening today coming out of the pandemic, and how both national governments, how industry will look at it, and also how education will look at it more, and families.
Well, it's interesting because you point that out, and then of course we're coming up on March, which is in the United States Women's History Month, and March 8th is International Women's Day, and we went from having a day, International Women's Day, to having a month. So I kind of think it should be all the time. Although I do think these days are helpful to focus our efforts and serve as sort of triggers for advocacy campaigns or government action. Every time we have like Day of the Girl or International Women's Day, or the Women in STEM, or Domestic Violence, Awareness Month, it does prompt companies and businesses to use that time to announce things. And so I guess I see them as ways to obviously increase awareness, but also kind of use as organizing principles from the outside, because it gives you, if you're an advocate, if you're thinking ahead a year or so, and you want to get a company or a government to do something, I mean, you can use that day, say it's March the 8th, if you're focusing on, women in general sort of women's rights, or Domestic Violence month is October. There's a Women in Entrepreneurship Week in November, I think. So they are like good hooks for advocacy. And I think they do provide that opportunity and platform for people. I mean, sometimes I think every day should be, International Women's Day. So why are we limiting ourselves? But I see them more as helpful advocacy hooks, I think, for people. And also as opportunities, as I said, to really raise the issues. I do want to talk specifically about girls' education, though, because I think in so many ways, and so many people on this call know it, the issue of girls' education is so foundational to everything else that we collectively need to do around the world to advance women and girls. And I would often be asked, when I was in the government or speaking, is there one thing that we can do that really helps? And the one thing I think we can do, if there was only one, is ensure that girls have equal access to education at every level, whether that's, at the primary level, where there is fairly equal access now globally. I mean, I think we have to look at the statistics post-pandemic, but there's really been great movement on equality of access at the primary level. Where it really falls off is at the secondary, high school, right, or tertiary university level. And why that's so important, I would say, just looking at each of those separately, is critical thinking skills. You hopefully learn them in high school or when you're an adolescent. Some people never do, but most hopefully do. And without those skills, you're really not able to fully participate, in the economy and society and public life. And there is very well documented research that shows that for every additional year of education that a girl gets, she will, earn more money, space her children more, she will marry later, she will participate in public life more. And so the data is really clear that ensuring that girls are fully able to develop those critical thinking skills and to develop into young women who participate fully in the economy and society is critically important. And, we all live in countries here where there is equality of access, but that certainly is not true everywhere. And I see that ARENA is on from Aid in Action, a group that I've been involved with working on girls' education around the world. And I know that that's like a very big focus for them and for all of us. And then the last thing I would say about tertiary education, which is, college, or a community college or a trade school or some kind of post-high school education, is that, that also obviously prepares women and men, but we're talking about women, to be leaders. And there are some really fascinating statistics in the US that, women who become student body presidents or participate in student leadership are much more likely to run for office. They're much more likely to be engaged in public life in the future. So, if we think about it on a university campus, and I know Karen's on from American University, just that whole focus on getting young women interested in student leadership and student body governance really actually has an impact on their ability to then, or their thought process about how they engage in public life going forward. And certainly we need more women still in public life. We only have 25% of women, 25% of Congress in the US are women, which is a huge leap, but still not enough. So I think girls' education is just the one thing I would focus on as we're thinking about how to engage girls and how to ensure that we are all kind of looking at what can help lift us all up globally.
We do have one other we have a couple questions coming into the chat, so thank you for everybody who's adding them. This is from Cindy Chin. Can you describe a moment where you noticed that women were not given a voice or seat at the table? And can you please describe how you addressed it and what resulted?
Well, there were many moments. I mean, in my life. I mean, look, I would say, I'm going to give two examples, and one is not really a seat at the table, but it kind of harkens back to my early life, which was I was or am still a lawyer and practiced law at a law firm in San Francisco. And, you know, I did litigation, which at my firm, there weren't a lot of litigators at the time who were women. And, you know, just actually being a young associate doing all this work and realizing that the people who were running my group, you know, my litigation group, were all men. And that was really kind of sobering for me, because I started out thinking, you know, of course it would be a fairly equal workplace, and that my views would be equally sort of respected as the guys in my group. And I actually don't know that my views weren't, but I certainly saw that there were not a lot of women leading my law firm. And so I decided, and I'm looking at Gay Grunfeld here because we were kind of in this together, like I was going to become a partner at this law firm. That was my goal, period. I mean, and even every time I thought of leaving along the way, which I did fairly regularly because you're working crazy hours and, you know, it's just a crazy thing. I would just think to myself, I want to be a partner because, first of all, I want to prove to myself I can do it, but I think it's important there's a woman litigation partner in my group at the firm. So the good news is I did succeed in that, but, you know, I was very mindful that that's why I was doing it in part. Obviously, it was also a professional accomplishment. But that's just one story from kind of the beginning of my career. And I think the second story, and several of you worked on the Hill, so I think you can appreciate this too. But, you know, when I worked in Congress, in the Senate, there weren't a lot of women senators, and there weren't a lot of women senior staff at the time. And sort of the same thing, like realizing that when policies were being formulated by staff, right, because the staff do the work for the members and present it to the members for them to use in the deliberative process, that I would sometimes be one of the few women, you know, in the room, and it would be a policy that had to do with access to, say, healthcare or clinical trials for drugs that would be treating, you know, diseases that we all get, but we now know that men and women have a differential, you know, response to certain kinds of treatments. And that makes sense, as do people of different races. And, you know, we have to really test drugs on everybody, because otherwise we're going to be developing products that aren't useful for some large percentage of the population. So, you know, I think everybody has their own style. I just, you know, I'm maybe a little bit more about trying to just get people to sort of see that it's important that my views are there and are valued. But I do think one thing that I always did was I literally sat at the table, because in the US, I don't know if this is true in other places, but, you know, there's always the table for like the decision makers or the primary participants. And then there's like a row of people around the back. And when I first started, I would sit in that row in the back. And then at a certain point, I realized I should just sit at the table and let someone try to kick me out of that seat.
So Stephanie, I'd just like to ask Janice, because it's an issue that does matter. We've both talked a lot about politics, and I've done a lot about women in being part of industry and through the 30% Club. And Janice has done a lot of work in America, particularly in New York, on giving accreditation to boards and to companies who've managed to get more women on boards, which is bringing them to the table. And Janice, would you just like to say 2 minutes about why it's important in girls' education as they go through going into companies, how important this is as well? Because we've got women in public life in different ways, but we can't run places without women at the table in the FTSE 100, in all the companies in America, in family firms and so on. Janice, we can't hear you. Janice,
You're not muted.
you muted.
Not on the, no, she's not for some reason. It's not.
We'll come back to Janice in a minute. Janice, you let us know when you're ready.
I'll go to the next question.
Let me have the next question, then Janice will come back in.
From Joan Libby Hawk, who asked, is there a revitalized role for the UN ramped up programs that women should be advocating for internationally?
That quickly. I've heard most of it.
Do you want me to repeat that question?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a revitalized role for UN ramped up programs that women should be advocating for internationally?
Yes, I think there is. And hi, Joan. Nice to hear and see you. Certainly, I think there is. Again, one of the issues that is so prevalent is that there's so much going on where there's a need for there to be intervention. And I do think it's important that as, entities, whether it's the US government or other governments or donors like the UN, are looking at programs that people really look at them strategically and try to figure out what are the interventions that can really make the biggest difference in that particular context. Is it girls' education? Is it political participation? Is it women in the economy? And really trying to structure them that way. I think, and I think that's one piece of the puzzle. I think the other piece, which I know, Joan, you've worked on this, is how to then engage like civil society actors and individuals from those countries or regions or communities in the development of those kind of programs. Because I think we're at a place now where there's a recognition that a lot of the programs that have been developed and used over the years by many, many different kinds of international actors, NGOs, governments, multilateral institutions, have not taken into account as much as they should the impact and the voices of those who are on the ground, right? The local kind of communities, the local leaders, the local grassroots activists, and the people who actually are going to have access to whatever that program is. And so I think one of the most important things in terms of advocacy is for there to be involvement by grassroots leaders and local leaders in the design of programs. And whether that's food security or safety or agriculture or access to education, I think it's critically important that local leaders and local voices are part of those conversations, so that whatever issue is being addressed, that it's not a situation where somebody from a particular government or a particular NGO sort of says, this is what we're going to do in your community. I think it's important that we engage local actors and figure out how to design programs that are responsive, to design programs together, and then to implement them in a way that really helps people address the issues that are before them. So I think that is where this advocacy in general globally is going. There's so much now of a movement towards that. And in fact, at USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, Administrator Samantha Power announced earlier this year that a fairly large percentage of funds that USAID spends are going to be spent on something called localization, or in the localization context, which means ensuring that grassroots groups and groups that are active on the ground are engaged, and that there's more local sort of buy-in and ownership of the work that gets done to address the problems that people face on the ground. And I think that is something that's really happening a lot in advocacy. And sort of just even tying it back to the book and sort of individual advocacy, I think that's a good kind of through line, right? That as we're advocating for solutions, to whatever we're advocating for, to make sure we're talking to other people who are also affected by that particular issue. I would just note, Senator Mikulski wrote the foreword to the book, and she writes in the book, in that foreword, about her beginnings of her advocacy, which was fighting a highway in Baltimore, which, for those of you who know Baltimore, would have just cut across the inner harbor, and it would have really been horrific for Baltimore in terms of how that area looks and cutting neighborhoods across, apart from each other. But she was very cognizant that she was, you know, a white woman from a particular part of Baltimore and representing that community, and how she and her co-organizers really reached out to the African-American community in a different part of Baltimore, but who would also have had a huge impact on their community if this road had gone through. And so really making sure that, you know, as we are advocating generally, that we're looking to engage everybody, or as many people as we can, who are also affected by whatever the issue is that we're working on.
So now that Janice is back with us, I hope I'd like Janice to come in on the question I asked her, who has this great expertise on women in business.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, clearly, Janice. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, Stephanie, I find it amazing, you know, still that in Congress, only 25% women. That's terrible, right? In business, it's currently 30%, so a little bit better in the Fortune 500. And I will say that in working with the boards and the searches we're doing, there is a great appetite for women, and particularly women now of color, is really important. So, and they're not looking always for the title. It was always, you know, the former CEO or retired CEO. We only have maybe 40 women who are currently CEOs and maybe less that has retired. They're looking for skills. And so when we're talking to these boards, we're really opening the aperture and showing them women who may not even be in the C-suite, but have the skills. To the point of education, I think too, there's a greater appetite now in reskilling. And there is a book that was done by Deanna Mulligan of Guardian, former CEO of Guardian and on the Vanguard board, about the need for companies to reskill, to really work with community colleges or vocational centers and bring individuals in, usually underrepresented groups, and mentor them and really bring them up. And I'm also, with my clients, my whole team is doing this, really talking to companies about not just at the top, but in the lower levels, bringing in, over hiring women in underrepresented groups and mentoring them and bringing them up, you know, because they're never going to get to the top unless there's more than one and two and three. You have to bring in more women and more people of color. The other thing I just want to mention in terms of scholarships, I have a scholarship in my sister's name that I started in 1999. It's at the master's level, public health. It's only for women, and now we have 23 women who've gotten this scholarship. And I say to them, it's not necessarily all money that you have to give, but some have done very well. They're all still working from 1999, even though they have families. But to give back to other women, bring other women up. So if you can get a network, and they really help each other. And I'm about to do another scholarship, and it's not that expensive when you really look at it, for first generation. And that's, again, women who are going to be first gen out of their families to go to college. And I think if we can all look at doing something along those lines, to whatever means we have to do it, and you get a network going, and you say to that network, your responsibility is to pay forward. You've got to pull other women up with you. Because I agree with you, education is the key for every society, right? So the good news is, I think companies are really listening, and they're focused on this, and we're going to keep honoring companies that have women above. Last November, Mary, I'm sorry you didn't make this one. We honored 200.
Well, next year, yes.
Next year, in 2023, we're already planning.
2023, definitely.
Yeah, 243 companies that were at 35% or more, but that's out of the Fortune 1000. So that's still not good enough, right? And only 44 of them have 50% or more. And I'm saying you can get to parity, 50% or more, by 2025 if you fill every other opening with a woman. So I'm a broken record on this, but it's like, it's sticking, it's happening. And I think if all of us do that in our own way, we can make an impact. So thank you for letting me speak. And
Stephanie. Pleasure. Because what you have to say goes with what Stephanie and I and our other friends who are on the Zoom this afternoon, this morning. So it's important that you put the issues that we're also fighting for, because without women in industry and in business and getting to the top, we're nowhere. We have to, and also the way they run businesses, the way they take care of people and make decision making is really important. So I think that's really, really important. There's just one question that I'm going to deal with very quickly in the chat, which is from Shira. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Yeah. And you asked about the question, and I'll only touch on it, and I don't want it to be a discussion about how the question of Prince Andrew and trafficking, and him mentioning trafficking in the UK. The comments so far have been, and this is just in the newspaper so you can look it up, is that they don't want him anywhere near that. That's been the from government, from the trafficking NGOs and others at the moment, that there is no place for him. I don't think he's really called it out. I think it was said in the press release, but I'll just close it down. But at the moment, nobody's wanting him to come near human trafficking. Okay, so the next question, Lauren.
The next question is from Sherry Bryan as well, but it's, can you talk a little bit, I think everybody's interested in it. Can you talk a little bit about what has happened to Afghan women who were in parliament and whether there is any work to support them in exile?
Yes, I will.
Yes.
Just one quick thing, harkening back to the Women on Boards discussion. I just read a study, Janice. Actually, it came out in the fall, but I just read it, so there you go. That said that companies that have, I'm just going to read it here, that had companies that had a woman CEO were much more likely to have increased numbers of women on their boards and increased numbers of women in management, senior management positions. So, and of course, there are very few women CEOs, but I did think that was a really important point to make the point that it's all kind of connected, right? That this is all about looking for talent, and that a woman CEO, looks like in the study is much more open to like looking for a broader and more diverse group of people to lead her company. So just one point on that I found really interesting myself. On the issue around Afghanistan, I mean, I guess I'll just say a couple of things first for people who don't know this, but I am back at the State Department for a short time working on Afghan resettlement and relocation issues. So just kind of in that space for a bit. And I do, obviously, we all know there was, on August the 15th, the country of Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, and we watched the evacuation on TV. It was chaotic, obviously, and, there's still ramifications for the fact that some people got out in the evacuation who, it's sort of unclear how they got on the plane and what their connection was, if any, to the United States or any other of the government's Western countries who were involved in Afghanistan. And then some didn't. So that's obviously an issue. I don't track individuals, but it is true that high-level Afghan women, whether they're judges or members of parliament or civil society activists, many of them did evacuate Afghanistan, some did not. And so there are, and some have ended up in the United States and other countries like the UK or Germany or Italy, Norway, Sweden, places, so they're in differing places geographically, kind of interestingly. There are some who did end up in a sort of a Western country, including the US or Canada, UK, et cetera. Some are still kind of, in these third countries, we would call them, whether it's, whether it's in the Emirates or Qatar or some other places, and then some are still in Afghanistan. So it's a little bit of there's not as much consistency as one might think on those issues. So it is a continual push, and there are efforts, every day to try to figure out how to ensure that the people who have been activists for women's rights, but also other, human rights issues are safe. So that's kind of the general answer. It's very, it's a very complex story. I do think the one other thing I'll say, and maybe you're asking this as well, is I do think there's a lot of interest in kind of back to the localization question and bringing it to this context is how do we take advantage of all the talent and skill of Afghans who have come here or to other countries, because they obviously, first of all, and not just about Afghanistan, though, certainly in terms of developing, programs here or ways that Afghans can better be integrated into the US. But these are obviously talented people. And so I think there are a lot of efforts to really think about in the, in this process of resettling people and integrating them into our communities, how to take advantage of all the talent that's there and really use that in a way that helps enrich the United States, because that's, that is who we are on our best days. And these are people who can really make us a more vibrant and diverse country.
I will say that there has been a number of universities, both in the UK and in America, who have been helping to retrain some of the senior Afghan women who've come, and one or two men, but where we've been able to get scholarships either from the country or from other people to pay for the 12 months, 2 years scholarship, depending on somebody's age, what they need, whether it's a year, whether it's the continuation of their education. And I think that's really important, alongside ensuring that in the countries that they've been able to get to, is to get their children into school as soon as possible, even if they're not into good living as yet, which is a worry, but the education is absolutely key to those children, because it's about what we've just been talking about today, so that they can continue to be citizens representing whichever country they settle in. And I know some say they want to go home. I don't think they'd like it when they got home, because it's in a really bad way, but that's how you feel when you're depressed. But what Stephanie is saying and the scholarships are really key. And if anybody's interested, I mean, Janice has mentioned her scholarships, and there are 30% Club have scholarships too in all the countries that we've got chapters and are on the webpage, but we can give you further and better particulars on those. But scholarships and the opportunities of scholarships, especially for people going back after or not having had that opportunity, but then to go back to university or to do an MBA is absolutely vital, or for retraining somebody who's come to one of our countries. Really key. Lauren, next question. Anybody else from the group with a question? Lauren, you're still on. Yes.
Yeah, okay. The next question is from Karen O'Connor, and it's what should be done about the threats faced by women at the college level who run for student government offices, particularly young women of color?
It's terrible globally. Absolutely.
Let me get to that. I do want to say one other thing about Afghanistan, just because I'm trying to come up with, as I'm thinking. I did have just an anecdote, an interesting story with a young Afghan man yesterday who's just got here. He's going to be working at the State Department. And he said his daughter is going to school and she's learning English and Spanish. So I loved that. She's going to be at least trilingual by the time she's through, school in Northern Virginia. So I think it's a fascinating kind of new world for so many people. On the violence against women in politics generally, and there are several people on this call who know way more about this than I do, Sherry and Susan Markham and others. I mean, this is a tremendous problem around the world and at every level of politics. I know American University has had some particular incidents around, I think it was the woman who was a student body president, and it was both racial and gender-based kind of animus and harassment towards her. So, I mean, that's one horrific incident, but there are many. And I think we have to, I think, look at, violence that can happen in real life, right? In in real life or online, but online is now real life, and it's a reflection also of what happens in the physical world. And so, that there is violence against women as candidates for office, violence against women who are in office. Joe Cox, one of Mary's colleagues, was killed by a constituent in the UK several years ago because he didn't agree with her, and he stabbed her, I believe, in a public setting.
He shot her. And he shot her. And he got a gun. And can I just say that we know in America you can get guns. In the UK, it's not allowed to have a gun. You have to have a license and it has to be locked up. He managed to order the parts for the gun online, and then he put it together. So all of us who fear that type of violence with guns, there seems to be a way, if you're determined to get something, that people get it. And knife crime is really bad, but also threats of knives to politicians is another issue too. But we don't want to go down that road. It's to keep everybody to upbeat, But it is there, and particularly online.
And also violence against women, to intimidate women who are voting, to intimidate women who participate in public life in general. So, this is a widespread problem. It's also an issue where there is a tremendous amount of advocacy around the world to address issues around violence against women in politics. I think the challenge is, and there again are others who know more than I, but it's very hard to police, in quotes, what happens online. We're dependent in large degree to the companies that own and maintain the platforms. And so there's a lot of advocacy around that, not just in terms of gender-based violence online, but hate speech and other things. And so, this is an area where social media isn't going away. It's a positive force in some ways for candidates in countries that don't have other resources. They can use it to get their message out where, and it's free. But at the same time, obviously, it's embedded in it is our perilous situation. So I think these are situations where it's really important to figure out what can address the issue and try to address it either online or in real life, understanding that these are manifestations. Violence against women are manifestations of views that we have as a society about women, right? They don't just happen kind of divorced from societal views and values and gender norms. So we need to address the gender norms around women's voices being important in public life, and then tactically address the issues around how to ensure that women who do want to participate in public life can do so safely.
Absolutely.
I think we're about at time. So I think we're just going to move into wrapping up now, so we can let everybody off a few minutes early before they jump on their next Zoom. So
I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and Stephanie, and everybody who's participated, because it's really important that we see what's happening, but we've got to go further after today. Today's just about the issues of coming out of COVID. We hope that we're going to be able to meet together like this, or in different parts of the world to meet in person. But it's really important that we don't take no for an answer, and that we don't walk away from, when we talk about education of women, we talk about women in public life, or we talk about women in business, that we stand tall and address it as it should be addressed. And also to ensure that every time there is any meetings, that we have the right number of women available to go. And if somebody can't go, we send somebody else. Even if they may not be the best, they'll do their best, because that's why they're there. And it's absolutely vital that we don't give in and go backwards, because that is what's happening in many countries. And also with what's happening in Ukraine, we know that the eye will go off the needle, and they'll put efforts into that, which is important. But also the day-to-day politics of women and girls must not be forgotten, and we have to continue moving with that. And Stephanie, I'd like you just to sum up a bit more, or you might want to read something from one of the pages of your book.
Well, I think I'll just sum up by saying thank you to you, Mary, of course, for doing this. And I guess three things. Thank you to you for doing this, and thank you to everybody for being part of this. and for being part of my life, because so many of you have been such big parts of my life. And it's really important to me. And you're the reason that I can, feel like I can do what I can do, is because I have your support and friendship. And I learn so much from you. And at least a few of you ask me hard questions all the time. Not all of you, thankfully. I'm talking to you, Susan Markham. Okay, that was just a little sidelight. And then, I hope you find the book helpful and useful. And I know that you all are very involved in advocacy on your own issues, but everything we do kind of moves forward together. So thank you again for doing this. And thank you for being part of everything that we're doing to ensure that the world is a more fair and inclusive place.
Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you all again. Hopefully, we're hoping to do something in the fall in Washington and maybe New York. But we'll be in touch about that as well. All right. Thank you again, and bye bye. Take care, all of you.